What type of persona, what kind of values should that agent embody? Think of customer service. You have an agent and you want this to be a friendly, helpful customer service agent. You don't want it to be so helpful that it optimizes everything for your customer, right? That you suffer margin, that it gives too many and too much discount. So as technology teams are experimenting with agents, they need to ground these agents in this information, right? How do we want an employee at our company to behave and act?
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Paige, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. I first saw today's guest on stage at a major AI conference, commanding the attention of about 1,000 people, and for good reason. He's one of the top voices helping enterprises turn AI hype into real business impact. And we hear a lot of people talk about that, but our guest today is actually doing that in a real way. Joining me today is Andreas Welsch, an internationally recognized AI leader, advisor, speaker, and he's helped Fortune 500 leaders unlock real business value from AI, accelerate the integration of AI across enterprise applications, and he's positioned SAP as an industry leader in AI. And if that wasn't enough, he's also the author of the AI Leadership Handbook, which we'll dive into later. Andres, welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be with you.
Yes, this is going to be a fun one. You get a really unique perspective, I think, on AI and how enterprises are adopting it. And we're weave through this throughout the conversation, but you have these 9 dimensions of AI adoption. But I think the key one to start with, and I think where a lot of organizations struggle with, is AI literacy within the organization. Like, how do you upskill your organization? And I've seen organizations that are doing it great. I've seen ones that are doing it very poorly. I've seen ones that are ignoring it. I've even seen the ones that are doing it great still have people that are kind of being left behind. But I'd be curious, what's your perspective there on maybe the right way to do it, the wrong way to do it? Who do you see doing it well? And are there just things that we just can't avoid? There's going to be pain in this process as we try to adopt AI.
Look, I love that that's the first question of the show, because I think it's so fundamental and so important that we bring our people along on this journey of more AI adoption, if you will. I mean, first of all, no business needs more AI. They need better leadership. They need better outcomes with the
Mhm.
help of AI. But I think as leaders, as organizations, we have a responsibility to train our people, to show them how can you use these tools and how can you use them in a way that's different from how we have been interacting with software up until this point. So I see a number of large organizations embrace this actually. They might use some enterprise versions of your copilots or assistants or chat GPTs, what have you. But in addition to making them available to their teams, they're not just, dumping it on their desk and say, good luck, you have a tool, tomorrow you're 10x more productive. But they also invest in training and upskilling. One of the best ways that I've found that this works is through a concept called social blended learning. That means there are different kinds of learning, different mediums, if you will, how you learn. It could be micro learnings, short 5-minute snippets where you learn about a specific topic. It can be in cohorts, learning together in an online session, in a virtual session, or even in person. And really also share the learning that you are making individually. So getting hands-on, trying out these tools, learning about what are the pros and cons, how do you use them in a way that you get good results and good output. And like that overall companies investing in this, they're seeing returns of, several hours of time saving per employee, because now they know how can I actually use these tools and they have a jump start to using them.
Yeah, and it's funny, like we do facilitate AI workshops for this very reason. Organizations want to upskill their company. And our main focus is building AI applications, but just tangentially to that, would they need help getting their team up to speed, right? But the thing that I find most interesting and where we've kind of evolved, I'm curious your take on this, is as part of the training now, we're actually building, we're using the tools, like we're going from use case to, okay, well, go try to build something with some of these tools. And what's cool about it is, that used to be reserved to developers, engineers, things like that. But now really anybody in the organization can build something with AI, whether it's a very simple, GPT, or, give them access to Lovable or Bolt and say, hey, go tell it to build something. And it's not going to be production ready, but it I see this in people's minds. It's this unlock. Their eyes kind of brighten a little bit when they see this new like way of doing something.
To me, that is super exciting because, as much as that buzzword is overused, but it democratizes access to the technology. To your point, you no longer have to be a mathematician, statistician,
Yeah.
trained PhD in some kind of optimization technologies and methods to use AI and to make it usable. So, if you're in an AI or in an AI leadership role and your management asks you, what are we going to do with AI? How does it fit to our business strategy? That could be one of the reasons why they're asking you, not just because they read the headlines, because they have the tools on their phone and they use them in their browser. It's a lot more accessible. So I think that helps on one hand also create this AI literacy and empower
Yeah.
people to, do self-study, self-experimentation, see what works for you, how are you using it? And I think that's exactly what we needed at this time in the tech industry, but also in any other industry, right? Helping people get more literate. How do we use these tools and get measurable value out of it?
Yeah, it's funny, you get the good side of the tools, which literally I feel like every single day I become aware of 5 new tools, you know? But that's it's like hell for an organization because 'cause you're like, "Okay, well, which tools are approved? Which ones can you use?" And of course, the point that triggered my thought there was people are using these regardless of if they're approved or not. I'm curious, like, is there a correct or recommended approach there in terms of how do you define the tools for the organization? Where do you allow leniency in terms of people playing on their own? And I don't know, maybe this dovetails. You talk a lot about this new role at the C-suite, the chief AI officer. Are they responsible for that? What does that role manifest into in the future?
Yeah. So look, it's one of the things that I write about and talk about in the AI leadership handbook, how chief AI officers should set up their role, right? It's a lot about enablement of the organization. It's a lot about understanding what is happening in the market. I mean, we're about 4 weeks into the new year, and it seems that every week there has been a big topic in the news, in the news
Yeah.
cycles, from artificial general intelligence to AI agents to newer, apparently cheaper, more efficient models. And that's just the last 3 weeks. So it it gets dizzying a little bit staying on top of all these things. But you need a central role in your organization that wears this hat of how do we actually incorporate AI into our business, into our processes? How do we bring our people along and educate them and enable them on how to do that? And the chief AI officer has emerged as one of those new roles that does have that remit. So multifaceted, right? On one hand, technology. What do we have? What do we need? How do we implement these things? How do we build applications? On the other hand, what are all the things that are happening in the industry that we need to be aware of and, sift through the news and filter, is this relevant? Is it not? And then also bring your people along. And where I see organizations succeed in that model is if that chief AI officer is or reports to a very senior level executive, ideally to a
Mhm.
president or a divisional president. Typically, if they are say VP reporting to the CIO or reporting to the CTO or chief data officer, they're usually more constrained. One in terms of
Yeah.
scope, right? They have goals that are the IT goal. They're usually ROI driven, for example. Technology, it's more about what are the latest technologies we should be looking at, not so much how do we work with the business and how can we drive measurable value. But in order to do that across the organization, ideally the chief AI officer works on eye level and also on a hierarchical eye level as a peer to the CFO, to the chief revenue officer, and so on.
Do you view this chief AI officer as an interim thing? And at some point in the future, AI is literally just proliferated throughout the whole org to where anywhere from your CFO to your HR leader, it's just a core competency they have? Or do you think it has staying power? Look, I'm trying to figure out the timeline that makes sense. 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road, is it still like a C-suite position or does it just kind of merge into everything?
I believe it's a transitional role. And if you look at others over the course of the last 10, 15 years, right, we've had the
Yep.
chief data officer, we have the chief digital officer, the chief transformation officer.
Yep.
And with every new trend, there seems to be a C-suite role and position that is tasked with leading this effort centrally and coordinating it across those different topics and aspects. So I wouldn't be surprised if, say, over the next 5 years, we see the hiring and relevance of chief AI officers increase again as other parts of the organization become more AI literate, as technologists and business people ideally learn how to better communicate and collaborate because they've gone through so many projects in that organization, right? And
Mhm.
as the organization also builds that muscle of how do we work with AI? How do we incorporate it? What can we use it for? What shouldn't we use it for? So I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years, again, the relevance of the chief AI officer decreases, but I'm sure there will be a chief quantum officer or whatever the next technology will
Yeah.
be.
That's right. Yeah, and I think there is value. I think that's right. There's value in this conduit to get you to that point for the role in time. And it's funny how these things kind of go back and forth. The whole, I've been on this in my with myself, like prompt engineering being this cool new thing, and then it's oh, that's going to go away. But as I'm getting deeper into it, I'm like realizing how critical how you structure your prompts from whether you're building software or working with AI on strategy or copy or these things, it is critical. So, going through my own journey of like up and down with these different components and things.
And
But yeah, go ahead.
yeah, see, the thing that I love about that is it's a lot more about it as humans and how we interact with the software and how well we communicate and articulate
Yeah.
the goals that we want to pursue than it is about this thing, this AI system doing something for us. If you put in a poorly structured prompt, you'll see it in the response. It's generic. It's not as specific as you want it to be. It's
Mhm.
not as pithy, as punchy, as relevant. So we need to do a little more thinking up front of what do we actually want? What is the relevant information I would give to somebody that, yeah, has an understanding of language and can recite some concepts, but how do I guide this to narrow it down so I get something that is really relevant and really valuable for me and the task that I want to do? I also believe that over time we'll see more low code, no code type tools. It'll be a lot more convenient as an average user to use these tools. Now, if you want to then dive a little deeper, build something yourself, customize something yourself, then I think you will need to learn prompt engineering again, or it'll still be relevant for the
Mhm.
foreseeable future as instructions of how do I want, for example, my agents to work? What are the goals, the personas, the things that it needs to adopt and how it should behave? So to your point, right? It, it, it depends where the scale tips and it also depends where you are and what you want to do then.
Yeah, and you just saying that kind of triggered something in my head. I think at the end of the day, it's almost like a base principle of the ability to communicate. We've given it this moniker of prompt engineering, but that's what it is. Like you're communicating, and it is very similar to interacting with a human. And I like to think of it in that way when I'm doing that. I find it to be more effective. But I'm curious, we had NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, the other day say IT will become the HR department of AI agents in the future. It's kind of a hot take, and I know a lot of IT people, especially on face value, are probably thinking, "What the hell are you talking about?" It would you know, not super happy about that, but I don't know. What's your take here? Is there some validity to how he's referring to this? Any thoughts on it?
So I was thinking about a similar concept towards the fall last year and published that in my newsletter, the AI memo. And I said, do companies need to have an agent resources department over time? And
Mhm,
secondly, in this whole exploration of how do we work with AI? How do we work with these no agents that can take a goal and figure out subtasks and work on them independently and come back to you and say, hey, this is what I've done. Do you want to move forward? Right? We're missing HR at the table. So over time in
mhm,
AI projects, right, we've added ethicists because we saw that, hey, there are biases in the data. We need to make sure that we mitigate it and reduce the biases. Last year, we saw more of the sustainability topics come in. Gen AI consumes a lot of energy and resources. How do we, find ways that we mitigate that? And I believe that we will soon see and need to have HR experts in that same project team as well. Because what we do as technologists now is, in fact, redefine how work will be done in the future. Today, we have people that have roles, that have responsibilities, there are tasks. It's very
mhm.
well defined. You know, the salary structure compensation is somewhat clear, at least within these roles, and there's an expected output. Tomorrow we'll
Yeah.
have agents. They will, they will work on individual tasks that somebody does today. So how do you, on one hand, define how this agent also should interact? What type of persona, what kind of values should that agent embody? Think of customer service. You have an agent and you want this to be a friendly, helpful customer service agent. You don't want it to be so helpful that it optimizes everything for your customer, right? That you suffer margin, that it gives too many and too much discount. But you also don't want it to just push profits, and your customer satisfaction might suffer. Think about an agent in finance. There are very strict rules and guidelines. Think of accounting standards like IFRS that these agents will need to abide by. Code of conduct, all these kind of things. So as technology teams are experimenting with agents, they need to ground these agents in this information, right? How do we want an employee at our company to behave and act? How do we want an agent to behave and act? Now, if you have 10 different teams working on this across the company, you might end up with 10 different interpretations of this code of
Yep.
conduct. And maybe 3 or 4 or 5 don't even include that code of conduct. So HR has figured that out, right? They've solved this problem long ago. That's why HR exists. So what can we learn? How we adopt these policies, how we want employees to behave. And I think that's a critical part where we will need to have HR at the table, and where, in fact, IT and technology teams are redefining what the future of work looks like.
Yeah. HR leaders are rejoicing around the world right now. But you hit on something too. I think there's huge business model impact as well. Business model impact, and then you hit on the point of, will we pay humans for this job? What does that look like for agents in the future? But if you think about it, SaaS companies essentially exist to make white collar workers more efficient. If you boil down to like brass tacks, that's what 90% of the SaaS products out there do. And now you have these agents that essentially, theoretically, in the future could come in and just replace the worker altogether. So and you see like major players like Salesforce, they've kind of shifted their entire strategy to agents, what they're calling, I believe, agent force. And then what does that do to pricing models? You have per seat kind of pricing as the standard out there, but I don't have a good answer for this. All I know is it's going to really disrupt things. And I think new players in the market that are starting with AI as a foundational component, building with it, have the potential to disrupt larger legacy players that, you see are kind of doing the bolt on or maybe the duct tape on of AI within their solutions. But what do you think in terms of like just SaaS in general? What happens to that in the future?
I'm convinced we'll see a lot of change, and in tech, in that SaaS space, but also in many different industries. I really empathize with this service as a software instead of software as a service.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you build capabilities, right? You focus on the outcome that you can actually deliver for your customer. And you will eventually in the future do this with the help of your software, your ones that work on these tasks, that gather information, that do research, that analyze it, that maybe have a conversation back and forth in a dialogue, in a discussion, and come out with the best result and present that either to one of your employees that signs off on it, or eventually do this fully autonomously. And it's one of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit for the last few weeks is, how do you actually price this? So I was fortunate to work on SAP's generative AI pricing model across all different lines of business, from finance to sales, procurement, HR, different products. And it was pretty complex. And anybody that's ever worked in this pricing commercialization area
Yeah.
knows it's not a simple topic. That's where I believe smaller players and startups will have a leg up, because typically it focuses on one very specific problem that they solve on one niche. And you know what that problem is, and you know what the outcome is that you're driving for your customer. So my hope and my expectation is that these startups are best positioned to look into outcome-based pricing models, because they have a very defined buyer. It's not any C-suite it's not a huge product portfolio that they need to look after, but something that's very narrowly defined. And then the question is, to me, on one, you have human labor today, again, with job descriptions, with expectations, with proficiency level skills, and a determined salary and a bonus in some cases. How does that translate to agents? Right? Today, we pay people a salary for given them, more or less irrespective of the output. Right? Certainly, you need to
That's
meet
right.
certain performance criteria and goals, but maybe Friday afternoons, you close up shop a little early. Monday mornings, you don't really feel it yet. Wednesday is your hump day. It's a lot to get through. Agents don't care about, right? They're on
Yeah.
24/7. They should ideally have the same level of performance, of readiness, of excitement. So how do you monetize this? Because yes, there's some transactional cost, but the value that you generate on top of it is a lot higher than a couple cents or maybe a couple dollars for the infrastructure and software consumption. So that's where I think it'll get a lot more interesting. And ideally, if companies or startups are able to figure this out, and the large ones as well, this should create a lot more value for organizations too, because on one hand, you can reduce your operational cost, but at the same time, generate at least as much value. At least that's the intent, right? I mean, the technology
Yeah.
agents are still a relatively nascent kind of capability. So we'll see over the course of this year, I think as well, it matures further. We see more organizations experiment with it, adopt it, and get value from it too.
Yeah, and I think it's like if the audience is listening and you drive in your car, like this is the key point. You got to lean into this change because you want to be helping push that change, not having the change happen to you because you'll just be better positioned in your career. But you mentioned that service as software. That's the best thing I've heard all week. You win the prize for that. I love that flip of those two because this transformation it also unlocks I forget which report it was in. I think it maybe Sequoia Capital or something, but they talked about this similar pattern where, software as a service is kind of constricted to this one area of what software does. But now you have this entire service market that it can now bleed into, especially with the advent of agents. And I think that's going to be a huge unlock for new business, new potential, all kinds of new things. I think it's a really interesting perspective on that side.
Yeah,
And so,
there's a lot of value to be created.
yeah. And I think one thing too for the audience, you know, if you're plugged in any way, shape, or form, you've heard a ton about agents. We're talking about agents now. I will say, if you want to go deeper on this, Google just put out a white paper pretty recently on agents, and it's just one of the best overviews I've seen. And they break it into three kind of logical components. And I think it's one of the best ways of thinking about it. You have three components. You effectively have the model, you have the tools, and you have orchestration. The model is pretty obvious. It's like whatever LLM you're using, right? The big unlock, though, is the tools that you're giving it access to and autonomy to use. So that could be literally it's using your Salesforce. Literally, it's has the ability to code. It has the ability to log into your accounts and execute tasks. That's a huge unlock. And then the orchestration layer is super interesting too. So this is essentially this ability to govern how the agent takes in information, performs some internal reasoning, and then uses that reasoning to inform its next action or decision. So, in general, you have this loop that will continue essentially until an agent reaches its goal or a stopping point. And this is the big piece. So, if you want to sound smart at your next, dinner party or company event, talk about it this way: you're giving it, empowering it with tools. You have the model, and you have this orchestration layer. And I think it's just a beautiful way of really dumbing down why agents have a ton of potential. But I don't know, any thoughts on those components and kind of what that enables and how, Google's talking about it there?
So I think we're seeing more and more to your point that this first layer around large language models is being commoditized. It doesn't really matter as
Yeah.
much on one hand what provider you use. They all have similar
Mhm.
quality, similar output. Over time, the expectation is that costs continue to drop. The part about what tools you give it access to, I think, is a really important one. because as we empower these agents to do things on our behalf, to complete tasks on our behalf, on one hand, we want to make sure that it's valuable, right? That they have access to all the swath of information that our employees have access to, because
Mhm.
the intent is that they can sift through it more quickly and they can, synthesize information and analyze it and give us recommendation. Now, the other part is, querying, reading information is one thing. If we expect it to write information, to, you know, commit information in that sense, if you think of code, we want to make sure, at least in the very beginning, that we trust that these agents work as intended. So while
Mhm.
it's nice to give it access to all your data and your financial systems and reports and your sales data, I think there's a level of trust we need to build as individuals, as users, that these things actually work as they should. And then
Yeah.
orchestration, where we are starting with individual agents right now, certainly even departmental. So team of agents that work on a marketing task, right? That create a marketing brief for a new campaign. There's one agent that analyzes your target persona and ideal customer profile. The next one looks at the pain points. The next one drafts some copy, for example, and have them work together. So from individual functional agents, we're already moving to departmental agents. And I believe that over time, we will move to interdepartmental agents. Marketing asks finance, how much budget do I have? Can I get a little more? How much more can I spend, right? This quarter, these kind of things, to even intercompany type agents. So one
Mhm.
agent from your customer's procurement department asks your sales agent for a quote. The sales agent again works with other agents inside your company to gather information, create the quote, send it back to your customer's procurement agent. That's where I think this orchestration comes in, because you will need to have some layer of coordination, orchestration. How do these agents in my marketing department collaborate? How do they interact and interface with this finance agent? How does that team work with sales? So again, coming back full circle to how do we organize work in a company and the department that already does that today, right? HR. So
Mhm.
to me, again, there's a lot of promise and a lot of potential in this AI technology. By the way, I also created 2 courses on LinkedIn Learning about the challenges and opportunities of agents for business leaders and how, as a senior business leader, you can prepare your organization. So you have a LinkedIn Learning subscription. Take a look there. They're each about 20, 25 minutes long. Also ideal for your commute. You just want to listen to them and just get a basic idea of what are agents and how should I think this in my organization.
That's awesome, and we'll definitely drop those in the show notes for the audience. I think, the last point I'll kinda say on agents, we've heard of OpenAI's operator that came out. You have to have the $200 pro subscription, which is kind of expensive. By the time this is released, I'm sure it'll be in their plus plan, or who knows, it'll just be free for everybody. There's also a really cool open source option I found called browser use. If you just go search browser use on GitHub, that's something you can set up on your own. And then do browser is another one that's pretty cool that I've seen that's 25 bucks a month. But you can start to play with these things in just small use cases. And I think it starts to give you context for how the things they'll be able to do in the future. Still very early days. Like they're not like this capable thing that can just go solve all the world's problems yet, but it kind of gives you a lens into how it moves. But the last thing I got for you, you talk about this concept of like human centered design and AI. I wonder too, and I guess I wasn't done with agents, but as agents kind of get proliferated out in the world, they're using the internet. Are we building experiences for agents in the future? And does this kind of like shift our thinking of human-centered design? Does a new thing come out where it's like agent-centered design, or do the principles of human-centered design still exist? In all that to say, if in marketing or strategy or business, you got to focus on the customer, the user, the end user, all that. But what if it's an agent? Does that change things?
So I've seen a lot of debate and discussion among marketing professionals actually around the topic of search optimization, SEO. But for
Yeah.
the last 2 decades, half decades, marketing professionals have been optimizing web pages, blog posts, what have you, to include keywords that allow them to rank these pages higher
Mhm.
in Google search index. Now you have companies like OpenAI in ChatGPT make web search available, look for articles. provide additional context to the question you've just asked in your session. And the question is, how relevant is SEO going to be, as one example? So there's a big debate going on. Do we need to optimize for agents, and how do we do that? I think it hasn't been solved, but I could see two things.
Yeah.
One is, yes, there has to be some kind of optimization. So agents and AI enabled software finds you, finds your page, finds your content, finds information about your company, that it even exists. The second
Hmm.
part is that human-centered design might move a lot more towards how you interact with that agent, not so much how you interact with that search and how you
That's
find that
interesting.
information, right? Let's leave the finding of information to the agents, but how do
Hmm.
I communicate? How do I see the results? How do I know that this is trusted? How do I know that this is really the most important thing, where these are the three most important sources on this topic? I think that's where we'll need to change it and adapt the design, not so much the interface with the search results or search itself.
See, that's why I have really smart people like yourself on the podcast for those kind of perspectives. And that SEO analogy is actually really a really good one. And you think back then, you're kind of building for Google in a sense. But I think to your last point, agents at the end of the day are a tool used by humans. If you can make that easier for humans in some sense, that still gets back to the base principles of human centered design and how we think of UX and all those different things. Andres,
Yeah.
thank you for being on the podcast. Ton of great information. We mentioned the book earlier. Where can people find it? Where can they find you? Give me the spiel. I know you do a lot of speaking at events as well. So, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, awesome. So if you want to learn more about how you can turn technology hype into business outcome, check out the AI Leadership Handbook. You find it on any major retailer, Amazon, for example, Barnes and Noble, many others, as a paperback, as an ebook, and most recently on audiobooks.com, also as an AI narrated version of it using my voice clone. Been
Oh,
experimenting.
cool. There you go.
Yeah.
Wait,
Well,
real
I
quick. What did you
love to,
use? What tool did you use for that? Was that 11 Labs
sure.
or?
Yeah. And I showed it to my family, or played it back to my family. I said, "Who is this?" And I said, "It's you when you speak English." Yeah, guess
Really?
what? That's AI. So it's really good and really indistinguishable from my real voice. And that's
Cool.
what gets me excited, right? There are lots of opportunities. So I wrote about that in my newsletter too, if you're interested on how is
You
that
know,
industry evolving, media
what
entertainment.
one other thing before we wrap too, this was kind of interesting. Like I was chatting with my wife the other day and her dad passed away several years ago, and she's seeing all this crazy stuff going on with AI just by osmosis with me talking about it all the time. And I think there are startups doing this, but she brought up the idea of, could we take my dad's voice and turn it into something that's AI generated to where she could talk to it. And that goes down this whole like, it could go dystopian, it could be a really cool tool, but it's those type of things. It's really interesting that it can unlock in the future.
Yeah, I think there are many opportunities, and I'm excited to see how fast the technology is evolving and what it
Yeah.
enables us to do. So, to me, the big question always is, what does that mean? What does that lead to? How can we, put this to good
Mm.
use? And how can we, for example, put this to use in a business? So if I can help inspire your teams, your audience, and show more how, technology will impact us as we work, and how we can use that to greater good and benefit, reach out. You find me on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you as
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I met Andres at this big event where he was speaking in front of a huge crowd, which takes some guts, and it was an awesome presentation. So definitely reach out if you need an expert at your next event conference. Or I think I'm assuming you do this with just companies as well, where you'll come into a company and talk to
well.
them,
Yes,
right? Yeah, that's great.
absolutely.
Awesome, Andres. Well, appreciate you talking some AI today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com.